Welcome back. Today we are talking about everything EMDR, especially if you're a starting therapist who is starting with EMDR. I came across this memory from 2 years ago. I just got the notification a month ago. And I remember this was the photo I took when I was celebrating that I finished the EMDR course and I had my first client where the memory got neutralized, the SAT went down to 0, and I remember that felt like such an achievement. And when I saw this memory coming up, or the photo, I was like, hey, that might be a fun thing to do for the channel, to talk about 10 things I've learned since then. It's been 2 years now, and I've practiced quite a lot with it. I think I would say that on most days that I work as a therapist, I use it at least once, sometimes twice or 3 times a day. And it has been a journey. So let's go to the 10 things I've learned, and I hope that you learn something as well along the way. And if you have a question, drop them in the comment section or send me a message and we will see if we can answer it. So first of all is the first message that I learned when I started EMDR is to stay off the track. And what I mean with that, in the Dutch way of teaching EMDR, the metaphor of a train and a train track is often used. And I'm going to share that metaphor with you as well, so that you can also get an understanding of what we mean with stay off the track. First of all, you can kind of see the memory network as this railroad with all these roads meshed together. Some are in these hubs or stations, and it's not a very clear road from left to right. And what you want to do is let that train ride go as smooth as possible. So that is also meant with stay off the track. Don't intervene too much. Just keep it with the protocol. And how they explain it to us is the first part where you choose the target, where you come up with the fit-in negative cognition, when you ask them about the emotions, where they feel it in their body. It's you're really activating that memory, and they would call that as you put the train on a mountain. So imagine you want to have the train, which is kind of the EMDR, have as much power as you start. You want to have that memory really active. So imagine that you put a train out of a mountain and you let it go. The idea is then, whoop, it goes in very fast. So that's the first part of the train metaphor. The second part is what I just told you, the memory network. You can kind of see that it's looking a bit like this. This is the map of Ticket to Ride, but it is a memory network that is associated at all kind of points that you can't really see, or a client doesn't really know upfront. You can form a theory about it, of course, but just know that the desensitization phase is couple trips through the network. So you follow the clients through their association until they run out of associations. They're at an end station, and you want to get the train rolling again, and it probably takes another route through the same memory network. So that's the desensitization phase. And in that, it's really important to stay off the track. So to not stand on the track and intervene too much. And one of the metaphors that I really liked is when the EMDR teacher that I had compared it especially in hard moments, when you are at a hard part, clients probably want to avoid. And they want to stop the EMDR, or they want to stop the intervention or avoid. And if you explain to a client with the metaphor of a tunnel, which fits the train analog very well, is that if you go through a big tunnel, you're going through the mountains, you have a long tunnel, it's dark, it is kind of scary. Stopping EMDR is the same as putting on the emergency handle at that point. Yeah, the train stops, but where are you? In the middle of a dark tunnel. It's not safe there, you don't know what is there, no one can help you there. That's the same with EMDR. If it is hard, you only want to push the train harder. So instead of stopping, or if the client says, I want to stop the EMDR, that you go along with that. No, you actually push it even harder so that you are at least out of the tunnel. And the other is like, don't intervene too much. Like this is like the picture of a Spider-Man, you know, where it's riding the train and like wanting to stop the train, but not like make it a stop train. Like let the train going from one place to another, but don't stop it too much. Only when it is really necessary or the EMDR is not working. But in most cases, stay off the track, follow the protocol. And in the beginning, I didn't find this the easiest part. That's why I included this Patrick, because especially like EMDR is kind of also like, yeah, you have the toolkit, maybe you do it with your fingers or online, but it's also kind of waiting a lot. Like you're not intervening maybe in a normal way that you would do with asking questions or diving deeper. And sometimes you might hear something and you're like, oh, like I wish I could ask this question, or I wish I could give this psychoeducation. And you might feel that itch to wanna do something. But like, please don't. I did that sometimes, and that was not like the right thing to do. So I remember having a conversation with my supervisor at the time, and she was like, no, you just sit on your hands, like let the protocol do its work, don't intervene. So yeah, it might be a test of your patience as well, but that's okay. The other one that I found a bit difficult in the beginning that might help you as well is like, when you are selecting targets for EMDR, is to kind of understand like when is it something that can be treated with EMDR or should be treated maybe with EMDR, and when not, because we all go through heavy things. And I think the population that you see in mental health like have a larger proportion of trauma compared to people who don't go to therapy. Having that said, it doesn't automatically mean that everything that someone has gone through becomes something with traumatic symptoms, or that they haven't processed it already naturally. Like our brain is capable of processing so much on its own in a natural way. But yeah, when to do it, like when do you want to do it and when not? And for me, the metaphor of a scar and a wound really helped, where the idea is when something is a wound, it is actually meaning that it is not properly processed already. So you can see this, but that is really told with very high senses. It's often very fragmented, doesn't have the right meaning. And when it is touched, just like with a wound, when you touch it, it hurts. People flinch, they don't want you to touch it. And it can easily get infected. That's happening with like a trauma wound as well. Like when someone sees something that has a small connection with the trauma, it can feel as if the trauma is happening again. It causes a lot of emotional pain. So then we would say that's a wound, and a wound can be an indication for EMDR. With a scar, people might have gone through the same thing, but you feel that when they talk about it, it is in a different way. It is often in a more cohesive way. It is often with the right meaning. It is often talked about as if it is something from the past. It can cause still emotions. People can cry about it, have certain emotions about it. But mostly when you are talking about it, the scar, it doesn't become so overwhelming. And then we would more say it is a scar, and a scar doesn't need treatment with EMDR. So in the beginning, you might like eagerly looking for wounds. Like when you start with EMDR, you're probably really excited. You want to treat people with it. And like, not because you take pleasure in suffering, but because you're enthusiastic about starting the EMDR practice. And I learned to just not jump in immediately with EMDR. Assess properly, like, is it a scar or is it a wound? And even when it is a wound, it is good to take these questions into consideration as well before you start. And the first one is a very important one, is like, is this wound like part of a bigger wound? Like, is this a separate, like isolated like incident, or is it really attached to all kind of other memories? And it would be, I think, a thinking error to see that you can treat a very isolated thing when it is connected to a larger network of unsafety or feeling powerless or not good enough. It can activate the whole network, and that is something that you need to take in consideration, that you actually have the time for that. And the second question, that is also what the client wants, because when they come in with a question for help, it is also important to not drift too much, like therapy drift or therapist drift, but just to stay also on the goals. Sometimes there might be wounds, but they are not like related to the current situation, and the client wants to work on those issues. So yeah, I attached this like picture of happy nurses and surgeons, because that's sometimes how I feel with trauma therapy. Like, I've discovered that I really enjoy trauma therapy, but that also feels a bit weird to say, because you don't enjoy suffering of other people. But I remember sometimes when you hear doctors talk about when they get like an interesting case, or they're like, yes, I've learned about this, I want to treat this. That's sometimes the same that I have with EMDR. Especially in the beginning, I was like, oh yeah, I haven't done EMDR on this type of problems. I'm really excited to start doing this and seeing this. So yeah, it's good to be enthusiastic, but also take your time. The third one that I really liked is that when I've done the course, like our teacher repeated, I think, I wouldn't say endlessly, but a lot, that it's a very forgiving procedure. So the protocol has a lot of steps, and you might feel like, hey, I'm working with trauma, I have to be like very on it, which is of course true, but he repeatedly said it's a very forgiving procedure, and the EMDR will work. So it's not that you can do a lot wrong, in a way that if you forget a step or you need to revisit it, it's not the end of the world. It's not as if the whole EMDR was not working. So be kind to yourself. It's a forgiving procedure. And especially in the beginning, you might notice like you have the protocol in front of you. You can literally follow it. And still, I forgot steps several times, that you're at the end and you're like, hey, I don't have the positive cognition, or, oh, the negative cognition, I don't think it's in the right domain, or you go to the target back too soon. So you kind of stepped on the track when you should have stayed off the track. Or like, at least in the Dutch protocol, there's also an option for what is the worst thing that could have happened. When sometimes people, especially in, for example, accidents, have this image of what could have happened if it was worse. And that's often the target that causes the most tension. But I sometimes forgot it. And my supervisor was like, hey, have you asked them if that was a picture as well in their head? And I was, no. And sometimes that was the clue to further progression in the trajectory to still do that. Yeah, and I also, I still sometimes find this difficult, is when you see that the activation of the target already causes all kind of emotions, and that I feel like I have to rush a bit through the negative cognition. And I think it's still very important to take your time for it. Yeah, to have kind of a right idea about in which domain it is. Yeah, that what I really liked about EMDR is that even though in the beginning you might have a lot of questions, you will notice pretty quickly that it is working. And I think that's really cool. Like, the first couple of times I was like, okay, it's actually working. And yeah, like, those things can process at the same time. You can feel insecure, or like have questions about implementation of EMDR, but also already doing it and it is working. So here are some of the questions that I had at the beginning. I think my supervisor sometimes was like, "Oh, girl, what's going on?" Because I was like, "Oh, help. Like, where do I start? How do I handle, for example, when clients say nothing is coming up, or they only say one word, or where like the SAT at the beginning is 8 and then suddenly it drops to 0. Like when someone is really trying to control the process and saying it's not working, or like I was like in the beginning I had a lot of questions, but I think that as with every procedure or life skill, it's just about making, I would say, making kilometers. That's like a Dutch saying as well. Like you have to just bring in the practice, make a lot of hours, and you will learn. Yeah, it does get easier. And the interesting thing is with EMDR, and I've heard that from a lot of therapists, that they said like after I mastered EMDR, or mastered like I'm able to use it, that they feel so much more secure in their practice. And I experienced that as well, that since I also have EMDR, I just feel like that I can actually help a broader range of clients, or the clients that I already saw more effective and speed the process. Okay, so the fourth thing I want to discuss with you is, okay, how can you adapt the EMDR when the SAT, like the emotional distress, isn't changing, so it's not lowering? And sometimes this happens, and there are like several things that you can ask yourself, and often when you change one or several of these, you will see that the train starts rolling again. So the first one is to ask like yourself and question this, is if the image, or like if the memory from the long-term memory is properly loaded into the short-term memory. When that isn't the case, like the EMDR is not working properly. And if you not think that this is the issue, that like the memory isn't properly loaded, you can solve this by going back to the assessment phase and letting someone describe it in more detail, or you can introduce objects or cues that are related to the trauma. Everything that can help to bring the memory properly into the short-term memory. The second one is that the working memory isn't high or difficult enough. So the idea is really that within the short-term memory, that there will become a fight between the memory that is loaded from the long-term memory and the working tasks. And they have to fight like at, I would say, a bit in the middle. That's the ideal point. But if the memory comes in, like it's flooding the working memory, like you see, you have to put in more to keep it a bit in the middle. So like this is, I think, the one that I've seen most often, is that when the SAT wasn't lowering, you needed to add, or I needed to add, more working memory tasks. And it depends on, I think, the setting that you work in, what you can add. When I work online, we can easily add colors. I think when you do it with your fingers, but also online, you can add more complex patterns. You can add in, like, also if you have the toolkit, or the other option is like the tapping. You can also do that with stomping your feet. You can let someone stand up and make a V-step. So combine these. My favorites are often the colors. And then I ask words to spell, or spell words backwards. Or I let them solve math issues, such as start at 1,000 and subtract 7. And I think especially sometimes these cognitive tasks give you also an idea about how much working memory there is. Because sometimes you see that people have such a high working memory that they can do so many things at the same time. And I think that really helps the EMDR. so that you have a proper battle again. The third one is about avoiding. Like within EMDR, clients can still quite easily avoid, even though you don't want that to happen. It can also happen quite unconsciously. Like imagine that someone has avoided a certain image for years or decades. Like it would be weird to make the hypothesis that when we do EMDR, that suddenly the brain is like, oh yeah, here you have it all. Now there's probably still like that protective barrier. And I think that if you focus on this, or if you notice this or have this hypothesis, if you discuss it with clients, they often can recognize that that might be happening. And there are like options to work with. I must say, for me, it was often enough to discuss it, but I know that in certain settings, they also do EMDR on the EMDR procedure. So if there is too much tension before starting, that you can actually do EMDR on the image of someone getting EMDR, or you start with a low SOT target. I've done that one as well in the past. There is also an option to do it blind to therapists if there is like too much shame. So then someone doesn't have to tell about their about what happened or their associations. But from what I've learned is that to use that really as the last option, because you actually want to learn people that they don't need to avoid, that they are safe in the present. Another one is that there is a long or frequent loop. So that you will notice in the beginning as well, that sometimes clients start looping. And with looping, it means that you can kind of see as if the train is running in a very small trajectory. That's the same association keeps coming. No new information is coming. It is as if like the associations have come to a stop or start looping. And a tip from EMDR is then to use cognitive interweaves. I'm not going to go in depth in discussing that part because I'm also still learning about that. And there is like a list of possible interweaves. And this is what I've retrieved of the book of Shapiro. So you can read a bit into it. But the idea is that you ask a question that's like the interweave to get the process going again. So that can be, for example, who is responsible in this situation? Or what would you want to do and do that? So these are like, you have to have a theory about which information is missing or could help to get the process starting again. And the last one is that it could be that there is a blocking belief or emotion or another image. So I think this is an interesting as well, and that I came across also several times, quite often actually, especially with the blocking belief, that sometimes you see that people, that the SOT is lowering, but that around 3 or 4, it almost seems as if they are not allowed to make it to 0. And sometimes that is the case, that there is a blocking belief like I'm a bad human or I'm not good enough. And the idea that actually processing further, that interferes with that idea. And it can also be a blocking emotion or something else. And what you do typically is provide psychoeducation on it. Sometimes that's enough, like when you talk with a client about that and they start to realize, oh, that's happening, and you can work through that. And another option is to actually use EMDR on the blocking belief. So if someone has a blocking belief like I'm a bad human, you kind of make a list with the client about things that they have gone through that made that belief feel very believable. And you treat those targets first with EMDR. So you can see it is sometimes quite a road into a network and you don't really know what you're gonna come across. So it is really helpful to have good supervision in this process. But when I learned about EMDR in the course, I expected that you would have to do one of these 5 things in all clients or something. And from what I've noticed is that with the basic protocol, you can help so many people. With most people, that works fine. Maybe you have to intervene with the working memory tasks, but the process is quite easily for most people. Or I might have to rephrase that, like the process itself is not easy, but the technique and how it is working goes quite smoothly. So that's really nice, right? To have something that can help with a lot of different targets in that way. Then another question is that you're probably going to face when you start doing EMDR is like you have people who have kind of isolated events. Like there has been one rape, one car accident. But there are also clients who have this whole scala of traumatic events when there has been frequently sexual abuse or frequently physical abuse, or when they have been bullied time after time. So you have to make a selection then. It's not needed to do EMDR on all of these targets, but you are sitting there with all of these targets and asking help, like, where do I start this EMDR treatment? And from what I've noticed, there's not like one very clear way of doing this. Like therapists have different ways of doing this. There are also differences, I think, between countries. Like in the base, from what I've learned in the course, is you always start with the intrusion. So really the memories that are linked to the flashbacks, the nightmares, the physical reliving experiences. And then you, within that category, you start with the highest emotional distress. But even if you have that information, sometimes clients still have, within that intrusion category, have so many different targets that are all criteria A trauma, that all have high SATs, and you're still wondering like where to start. So I'm going to talk about 3 different ways that can actually help you and the client to have an idea about how are we going to organize this. And the first one is like the session scheduling form. This is from a Dutch handbook more for exposure therapy, but it's also very easily usable within EMDR therapy, where at the start you kind of write down the trauma category, how old someone was, who was the perpetrator, the specific situation, and the intrusion load. So on a scale from 0 to 10, like how heavy are the intrusions from that one? And then you can schedule it for a session. And when you organize it like that, it becomes also clear for clients, like which targets are we going to do, and discuss that you often pick the one with the highest loads. And a metaphor that can be really easy to kind of motivate or explain this to clients is like this metaphor of like the throwing balls at a carnival, or like a fair, or in Dutch you would say a kermis, is like if you have a tower like this and you start throwing a ball and you hit target 1, 2, 3, that's great, you hit a ball. However, it is best to hit the bottom row, like 7, 8, 9, or 10. Why? Because the whole thing collapses. And that's the same thing what we have seen with EMDR, is that if you target the highest SAT, so the highest emotional distress, that is often the bottom row. So when you hit several of them, or sometimes only one of them, that whole memory network can collapse, and the other memories kind of profit from the EMDR on the hardest targets. So we call that the generalization. So the whole network profits from that. So that's why you are aiming for the bottom row. And I've noticed that clients often become also, how would you say, motivated, or like feel more empowered to actually hit those targets at the first part of EMDR. Another one that is easy to use is to use memory clusters. Especially with clients who have more complex trauma, you will notice that clients often themselves also have some kind of categories already, that they're like, yeah, there was like the physical abuse of that, there was like this happening, that they have these kind of memory clusters already. But it can also be that you kind of as a therapist have this idea about these clusters and then you can come up together. And this is especially helpful also when there is like different sets of cluster A traumas. So when you have a long list of intrusion-based trauma, which really cause those intrusions, and they all have high SATs, it can be easy to make different categories and select the top 3 from each. So the bottom row from each. So in this case, for example, you see that there is a physical abuse memory cluster with the 3 highest. You see a witnessing physical abuse with 3 clusters. For example, when a kid also saw that their parent beat up their other parent or their brother or sister. There is a sexual abuse category and others. And you process this with one cluster at a time, but keep in mind to start with the intrusions and the highest SATs. Then there are also clients that you work with probably that have that combination of criterion A traumas and non-criteria A trauma. I think that is what you often see with complex trauma, that it is not all criterion A, but also a lot of neglect, bullying, social exclusion. And then you can also use this approach where you at first target like the A criteria trauma clusters, then the non-criteria A trauma clusters, but with a focus still on control and on safety, so like those domains. Then you can do the non-A criteria trauma involving other emotions, and at the last you are breaking avoidance and safety behaviors. That's a very thorough method, and it also helps clients often because when there is still a lot of non-A criteria trauma related to control and unsafety, it's sometimes harder to progress other emotions and other things. So yeah, those are different options. And if I have learned from some mistakes that I made is that maybe, especially in the beginning with some more complex trauma cases, I really felt at the start like, oh, I have to organize this properly and it has to like, how do I do this? But it is also good to start with like you have some overview, but also to have working space to follow the client's process, because sometimes clients have dissociated from a lot of trauma, and when you start activating a certain network, things come up. So also don't be too afraid to have space to maneuver and follow the process in this. So another thing that can be helpful to know, I think, a bit at the front of your journey with EMDR is that you often see the protectors that people use in real life and like out of therapy to deal with the trauma that they come up with in EMDR as well. I had the supervisor I had when I started this really focused a lot on this part when she asked me sometimes like, hey, how does this person really cope with this in real life? Okay, and how do you expect that to show up within EMDR? And that also gave me a better language to understand like what is going on in the EMDR session, why are certain things not working, and to find a language to communicate that with fellow colleagues or in intervision. And like the first one is more the control coping. So when you feel that someone really kind of doesn't benefit as much from the EMDR because they're really trying to control the EMDR itself. So wanting to ask questions about the EMDR during the procedure, like questioning the process itself, thinking a very long time before answering, or giving very detailed answer, or really doubting about what is the right thing to say right now, feeling a lot of anxiety about doing it wrong. Another one is more the dissociation protector, and like I think there are like different ways of how dissociation can show up. In the client population that I see, it's more like, I would say, small dissociation. So someone is still talking to you, but they notice that, oh, hey, the emotions are gone, or they say, hey, the SAT now is 0 when a moment before it was 8, or they feel very tired all of a sudden. They really, like, you feel that something has shifted. But it can also be full dissociation, where you really don't notice that someone is not in contact with the procedure at all anymore. You have more the avoidance protector. So this probably shows up as that you feel that someone might not be sharing all the details, or like leave out certain parts, or not choosing a target that actually happened with a higher SAT, wanting to stop the EMDR mid-session, not wanting to stop the therapy altogether. And sometimes this can be hard to notice, because when it is more the subtle avoidance, when someone is really avoiding things inside their head, that's not the easiest to pinpoint within EMDR, because the patient also has like kind of a say in which associations they are sharing. Like if something else is going on but they don't share it, you can form a theory about it, talk about it, of course, but it's not always easy to notice this. And the last is, I would say, that the people-pleasing protector, when you feel that you can kind of see in the session or on the body language that there is still tension, but someone says, no, it is 0, or you feel that they kind of rush through the target because they think they have to do it. The most common form that I've seen this is when people almost feel bad when the SAT has lowered, that afterwards it goes up, and they say like, oh yeah, I think that by now, it might even be higher, as if they feel bad almost for the procedure or the therapist, or like as if they are doing something wrong. And the same is with the installation of the positive cognition, when they just know that you want to build it up, so that they might say a higher number than it really is, or in the aftermath that they kind of diminish the after effects or don't ask for help. But it can be whatever people use. So when someone is used to use substances, they might feel the urge to use a substance before or after the therapy, or self-harm, or become really angry or frustrated. I think it helps to kind of have an idea upfront also about what is the coping mechanism of these clients, or what are the coping mechanisms. And when in the beginning, especially with more complex trauma, I think clients sometimes become frustrated as well, because they notice that these protectors are coming in. But when they also start to understand what it is, you can actually bring that into the EMDR, that people say, oh, I think like when after a time of doing this, people can kind of start to see when this is happening, and they can bring it in the associations as well. And I've noticed that helps a lot, also because of the protectors that are coming in normally without the session, that it can help lowering that as well. Then I think an important one is, the text on the picture says is to be gentle with yourself. I don't know if this is necessarily a therapist quality, but I think that for some part you do get more, I would say, conditioned or desensitized yourself for trauma material. But when you are starting with trauma therapy, and if you haven't worked with other trauma therapies that much yet, this might also be the first time that you really encounter more the details of horrible things, like with sexual abuse, murder, torture in refugees, severe neglect, physical abuse. You might encounter stories that, even though you have heard on TV maybe that these things happen in society, it is different when you hear it from a person in front of you. And I think that one of the mistakes I made in the first year is that I felt enthusiastic about EMDR. I really like doing it. And I was really interested in how does this work? The sessions with my supervisor were more focused on, hey, I'm actually doing this. I have this client, the EMDR is not working. and then we come up with with ideas, and I really built my skills in that part. But I think that I sometimes underestimated the actual emotionally load of starting to do this, and that I also didn't have like the most adequate coping, that even though I thought I had adequate coping skills, I noticed that I also fell a bit in my old pattern, is like to not talk about it, or feeling that I have to be able to deal with this myself. And after a while, I noticed that I was actually taking a walk on the weekend, and I felt really emotional about something that was related to the trauma material, and not like sad, but I had a lot of anger in me. It was one of the first cases that I did with sexual abuse by a parent, and I had just like, there is also a part of having to come to terms with certain things of society, of humans, in yourself. And like when I started talking about this with my supervisor, she was really like, yeah, you know that you can come to me, and I know that. I also felt safe with her, so why didn't I do that before? And I also struggled with like, yeah, I do maybe want to talk about it with people in my environment, but like not like space specific things, but just like the broader topics. But I also felt like, yeah, they haven't studied for this. Like, I don't want to bother them with that. But I did a bit of exposure in that myself, that I started to talk more about it with colleagues during intervision, ask like therapists that have more experience, have more years under their belt, like, how have you dealt with this? How did you deal with it? And that helped so much. So I think that, yeah, that really helped. And with friends, like not talking in case specific, but I did talk to them like, hey, I'm more encountering this topic of pedophilia. Like, can we just discuss it a bit? And that actually already helped. And it is true that over time it becomes easier in a way that I didn't expect. Like, I noticed it the last time that, yeah, you do get more desensitized, and that's actually really nice to notice as well. But don't feel bad about getting to that point, and in general, don't feel bad if things bother you or you feel emotionally charged by it yourself. Like, you're human, and I think that especially as a therapist, you are one of your own best instruments. It's great that we have all these therapy forms, but in the base, keeping you healthy is like a very important thing about this job. So just don't feel hesitated to reach out to other therapists or to invest in supervision if it is possible, and also discuss the emotional load of these things rather than just the practical side of learning a new skill. Another thing that helped is that I've done an extra course this fall about CPTSD to just feel more confident. And we had like, our teacher was like not at the end of his career, but like he had practiced for decades, and they made a chapter about actually things that can help when you work with a client population of a bit more complex trauma. And some tips from this book, it is a Dutch book, but I will list them here, is like to talk with colleagues, just what I said, but also to invest in yourself and understand your countertransference and what's happening with you, to know your stress signals and to listen to them. What I found really helpful is that he also pointed out that when possible, it's really important to have like a heterogeneous population, so that you see complex but also more simpler problems. But yeah, if you work in a specialized team, that might not also be possible. But if it is possible, try to do that, to slow down your work pace, and to, if things not go as you hoped for, or the client is not happy, you are not happy, your boss is not happy, to judge yourself based on your last 10 clients. So of course, like, you learn from specific cases, but don't try to attach like a general opinion about yourself or yourself as a therapist based on one case. Like, that is not helpful. So yeah, I think it's probably with like every video I want to make is to point out to just take good care of yourself always. Okay, so then we are going to the last ones. Those are a bit smaller. I think that it's also good to realize that abuse often comes with neglect. They are often like a brother and sister in a way that it's almost like, I wouldn't say impossible, but like often people who experience abuse in a way also experience neglect. It can be from the same parent. It can also be that there was more an abusive and more of a neglectful of enabling parent. And don't be surprised that when the abuse targets are lowered, or like I would say desensitized, when that network kind of collapsed, that the neglect part becomes much more visible and feelable for the clients, that they suddenly start to notice just how much they have missed or how much of not being emotionally educated they are, and really feel that pain. And it can be that was not clear upfront at all. So you might be happy that like the EMDR is almost done, in a way that you feel like, hey, you see the client's making progress, the client is happy, and you feel like you are coming more towards, I would say, the third phase of, it's not really a phase more, but more like the after trauma treatment phase. But then you realize, hey, there's actually maybe just as a large of a network that is really attached to neglect. That doesn't automatically mean that you have to treat that, but I think in most cases it needs to be treated. It doesn't mean that you need to treat that with EMDR. I think there are also other therapy forms or trauma therapy forms that can really beautifully help with more neglect. But I was also thinking, like, how does that actually work? I think that just as what we talked about, like abuse targets are often really linked to those intrusions, flashbacks, nightmares, and it's often really about this space of unsafety, feeling powerless, very high anxiety and feelings of unsafety. And I think those are like so strong that they can override a lot. So they can probably also override more the neglect part. And it can also be that people haven't really considered like how much pain has been caused by the neglect or enabling from another parent or the environment, and that pain becomes much more visible when they get psychoeducation about it during the trauma therapy. And another thing is that it doesn't necessarily work like that, but for most people, you can kind of see that when something is done to someone, when it is wrong, like physical abuse, sexual abuse, and people kind of know that on a level, but realizing what should have happened or should have come to you but haven't, that's much more difficult maybe to notice. Therefore, you have to know what is normal to come my way. You have to understand what are basic emotional needs. So I think that's also part of neglect, is that there is not much education about emotion. So how can you know what you don't know? It's interesting, but something to keep in mind, especially when you suspect that there has been a lot of neglect as well. Another mention that I wanted to give, even though it is briefly, is the benefits of flash forwards. And I think those are especially helpful in clients with anxiety and avoidance. I also work a lot with clients with anxiety-based issues. And I've seen so many clients also become better or feel much more self-confidence after we've done one or several flash forwards. And like the most important, how would you say that, indication for flash forward is high anticipation anxiety. So when they are really anxious about something that will happen in the future and think about going on a plane or performing on a stage, having sexual intercourse for the first time after experience sexual abuse, can also be about like the anxiety for having a new panic attack or a new depression or a new psychotic episode. So it is really focused on the future, but the procedure is kind of the same. And here you can see an article that is written about it. But yeah, also in this case, it is good to notice or to at first form an idea about if the flash forward is attached to a broader network. Like, I wouldn't necessarily say do only a flash forward when you know that there is this whole thing in the past based on trauma, or there are a lot of active wounds, because the network, even though like theoretical they are not the same thing, but in the memory network they still can be linked. And last but not least is that what I find interesting is, like, I work in the Netherlands, but I love talking about these subjects in English because eventually I hope with this channel to reach and talk to colleagues from all over the world. But that there can be quite a lot of differences in EMDR in the protocol itself. There are like several differences between the Euro protocol and the American protocol. There are even differences between the Dutch protocol and the Europe EMDR protocol, even though I felt like the Dutch organization had like a little tick on the fingers that they have to do it the same as the Europe edition. So we have had a new edition last summer. But you will also notice that, for example, in some countries, PTSD is the number one choice for treating PTSD. But for example, in the United States, it's not even listed as a first option of treatment. It is also not as popular in countries like China or Japan, but it can be. I know that Australia, I feel like, is really on the forefront. So they have even now have officially made it as a recommendation for treating depression and different anxiety disorders. So it is just good to know that there are differences, but the World Health Organization, so I would say in broad across the world, EMDR is recommended for PTSD in both children and adults, and there is moderate evidence for that. So just know that if you're listening to podcasts or talk with therapists from other countries, that it might not be as ingrained as it is in your country that you practice in. So yeah, that were the top 10 things that I was like, hey, that might be helpful for someone else as well. I am like very enthusiastic about EMDR. I'm not someone who would say, oh, throw EMDR at it and it will work every time. But I do think it is a very powerful tool for a lot of different issues, and also for therapists to just feel more secure and have an effective method in treating impactful memories, which can be part of PTSD. But as you notice in your job, those are the base of a lot of other issues as well. So thank you for listening, tagging along. If you have any questions, drop them in the comment section, and I hope to see you soon again here. Bye!